Miguel de Unamuno is a Spanish existentialist, poet, and playwright who lived at the turn of the 19th and 20th century. Unamuno is one of the first thinkers to introduce Spanish readers to the ideas of Charles Darwin. In the first stage of his philosophical activity, many references to the theory of evolution can be found. Also, in other later texts, references to the English biologist can be observed, but they gives the biological terms a new metaphysical meaning. Peter Early, in his article Evolutionism in the Unamuno Thinking, analyzed the influence of Darwinism on the characters of some of Unamuno's novels. The Basque philosopher does not directly express Darwin's concepts, but uses some of his ideas to defend his own philosophical intuition about spiritual evolution. Unamuno presents the development of human self-awareness in the key of the theory of evolution. If we want to see the direct influence of the English thinker on the philosophy of Miguel de Unamuno, we must also look at the essay El Darwinismo, which is the first text indicating his knowledge of Darwin's thought. In addition, the work Del Sentimiento Trágico de la Vida, as well as the occasional speech delivered in 1909 on the centenary of Darwin's birth in Valencia, show strong connection with the ideas of the British biologist. In the essay Conversación Tercera, published in 1910 in the journal La Nación in Buenos Aires, Unamuno emphasizes his attachment to Darwin's thought, pointing to the Copernican revolution started by him in the reflection of man. Unamuno is particularly interested in the Darwinian idea of struggle for life, which he uses to explain the individual's desire to preserve self-awareness after death. So it's not just about early existence, but about beyond existence. Marco dos Santos, an expert on the thought of the Spanish philosopher, emphasizes that among the many Darwinian concepts that Unamuno incorporates into his thought, the idea of the struggle for existence and its implication in Unamuno's thought deserve special attention. An example is Darwin's theory of natural selection, which includes a dual perspective on the problem of adaptation. Adaptation as a process and adaptation as a state of being. From this perspective, attempts are made to explain how physical circumstances determine the condition of an organism's existence and how they affect its changes and, above all, expand its self-awareness. The Darwinian concept of biological adaptation was used by Unamuno to demonstrate the internal struggle that takes place in the personalities of his characters, who become more self-aware by confronting internal and external conflicts. Unamuno believes that the external environment has an impact on the world of internal phenomena of human experience. It affects and stimulates consciousness, which responds to stimuli and expands through them. There is a continuous flow between the individual's consciousness and the surrounding nature. This means that there is a connection between the inner world of a person's mental experience and the external biological world. According to the Spanish thinker, man and the world are not finite realities. The development of individual and the world is based on the acquisition of ever greater consciousness, which occurs through the experience of suffering. Evolution ensures not only the external development of living beings, but also the internal development of consciousness beings. Unamuno presents this idea in the context of philosophical religious considerations. Perhaps it's a blasphemy to think that God suffers, because suffering entails imperfection. Yet God, who the consciousness of the universe, is limited by the crude matter in which he exists. He is limited, but that which is devoid of consciousness, from which he tries to free himself and also draw us. As humans, we must try to free ourselves from unconsciousness. God suffers in everything, and each of us, in all consciousness, that are victims of transit matter. The feeling of inadequacy, the experience of inner anguish, is the sense that God suffers in me and I suffer in God. According to Unamuno, the struggle for existence is a dialectical process and accomplished most fully through suffering, which creates an ontological bridge connecting two seemingly opposing realities, temporality and eternity. Man feels a kind of longing for the infinite, yearns for reaching beyond the limits of corporality. Human hybris awakens the desire for immortality, but without losing the autonomy of consciousness. After death, according to Unamuno, man cannot dissolve in the divine consciousness. The awareness of the finitude of existence provokes an ontological shock, which means directing actions towards the struggle for existence beyond the horizon of finitude. At the same time, it gives rise to the pain of consciousness, which is a kind of psychic pain. The metaphysically disturbing internal, subjective, objective split of man is only the beginning of his via dolorosa, a way of the suffering. Because once awakened consciousness, beings a whole series of cognitive processes that allow it to perceive not only itself, but also other beings that are not it, that are not I, but they are different from me. Perception of this kind is unavoidably connected with the feeling of one's own finitude. It turns out that not everything is me, that I is only a particle or one of the elements of everything what exists. The discovery of limitation in man intensifies the primal pain and struggle for existence. For Unamuno, this is why suffering is the path of consciousness. Because suffering is the way followed by consciousness, it is the environment in which it develops the reality in which it errs. Man is constantly struggling with evil, with suffering that is not only physiological in nature. According to Unamuno, pain is a subjective experience that touches the inner being of man. Pain makes it possible to discover the spiritual dimension of existence. On the one hand, man can try to escape from physical or psychological suffering by taking stimulants, painkillers, but at the same time, one can also seek other remedies for the wound of finitude. In his reflection on man, Unamuno points to suffering as the main factor externalizing what is the spiritual in the individual and prompting the search for what is beyond the limits of matter. Suffering awakens consciousness, and this consciousness looks for ways to win the fight for its existence. Unamuno ponders, man, when he rejoices, forgets himself, forgets the fact that he exists and thus pushes away himself from himself. And he only becomes himself when he experiences himself through the suffering. Consciousness is always the awareness of pain. To be conscious means to experience pain, which is a kind of anguish. Awareness of the limitation imposed by corporality is a discovery that man is doomed to fight for the shape of his existence. This means that for Unamuno, man is an unfinished being who is constantly evolving, expanding, or limiting his self-consciousness, and pain is part of the path to self-knowledge and serves, if accepted, as a force for self-improvement. According to Unamuno, pain has its degrees, intensity, and strength. Destructive pain is external in character and passive. Man feels pain, suffers, loses the will to live, and wants to be part of unconsciousness matter. There is no eternal perspective before him. However, suffering can be perceived by man as a creative reality. Although the individual does not accept pain, he or she seeks a way to give it meaning. In this case, suffering is a creative factor that opens human reality to another dimension, reaching beyond physicality. Unamuno states, pain, which is dissolution, makes us expose our entrails, and in the final disintegration of death, we reach through the pain of annihilation to the entrails of our temporal bowls to God, whom we breathe during our spiritual anguish and whom we learn to love. Pain, that's why, is an intrinsic part of the life. But for Unamuno, it is also the substance of personality, because only suffering makes a human being a person. Pain is something universal, which unites all human beings. We can say that it is kind of blood, divine blood, circulating in creation. Suffering is primarily metaphysical and is not limited to what is physical or biological. The pain of the soul, the sorrow, creates the opportunity to go beyond space and time, allowing man to say the supernatural meaning of existence. Pain is an impulse to fight so that a person can freely discover his or her way to full consciousness. However, the development of the individual takes place only through the struggle for greater awareness. This struggle continues through man's life and reveals one's limit. Unamuno said, insuficiencia de la vida, limited of the existence. Concluding, the process of evolution and associated with its struggle for existence is understood by Unamuno as a dynamic process of growth of consciousness and extension of the act of creation, which some theologians interpret as continuous creation. Matter reveals God, the Creator, but at the same time conceals his presence. Man belongs to the noosphere, the immaterial dimension of existence, yet he strives to transcend biology, the biosphere, in order to connect with the transcendent and achieve in him the fullness of self-consciousness. For Unamuno, the development of self-consciousness occurs through the experience of the fragility of existence. Suffering is for him a basic ontological category. There is no conscious self without suffering. The ontological forces of man are moved by the cosmic motion, which has its origin in the supreme consciousness, at the omega point. In other words, every creature is in the constant motion which brings them closer to the specific goal, which is the union with the supreme consciousness. Pedro Cerezo explains it this way. For Unamuno, existence is action, growing through one's choice and experience suffering. In this way, man discovers in himself an element of something immaterial. In the philosophy of the Spanish thinker, the struggle of life, struggle of the consciousness, goes beyond temporality. In his philosophy, Unamuno indicates that suffering awakes consciousness and makes a person mature and become more himself, aware of his or her being and the purpose of their struggle, which is the struggle for the eternal existence. Thank you very much for your attention. Unamuno is very, very interesting philosopher. Is the first one who apply modern thinking in Spain. That's why we can also find something what is it's a shake of thinking, we can say, shake of philosophy and theology but is the first modern philosopher, in my opinion, in Spain.
Thank you very much.